The dying man's gift. The wind came down from the northern hills, dry and full of dust, carrying the scent of sagebrush and loneliness. Out there, on the edge of nowhere, stood a small, weather-worn ranch. The Hollow Creek Ranch, owned by a man who had long since stopped talking to the world. Eli Cartwright, a former soldier turned rancher, had spent the past 7 years in silence. The war had taken his brother. His legs still bore the mark of a bullet, and the town had taken his faith. Now, only the desert wind kept him company, and the horses that grazed under the dying sun. That evening, as Eli was mending a broken fence post, a sound broke through the quiet. The uneven trot of a horse, fast and desperate. Eli looked up. A man slumped over his saddle, his body barely holding on. The horse, covered in dust and sweat, stumbled to a halt right before him. "Help!" the man gasped. Eli rushed forward, catching him before he fell. The stranger's clothes were soaked with blood. His eyes flickered open, clouded by pain but filled with purpose. "Name's Thomas Avery. Been riding 3 days straight," he whispered. "I'm dying, Cartwright, and I came to give you something." Eli frowned. "You know me?" Thomas nodded weakly. "Everyone around here knows the loner of Hollow Creek. You don't talk much, but they say you got honor left in you." He coughed hard, blood staining his lips. "That's why I rode here." Eli carried him inside, laid him on the old couch near the fire, and poured a bit of whiskey into his mouth. Thomas's hands trembled as he pulled out a folded paper, an old marriage certificate, worn at the edges. Eli looked confused. "What's this?" Thomas's breathing came short. "My wife, she died last winter. Left behind a daughter. Clara. She's all I got left. I can't make it to town, and I don't trust the men who'll come after me. She'll be alone, and I can't let her end up in the hands of the wrong kind." He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering what strength he had. "I married her to you on paper 2 days ago. I had the preacher sign it before I rode. You're her husband now. Eli, protect her. Keep her safe. She's at my cabin, 10 miles south." Eli's jaw tightened. "You had no right to—" "Maybe not," Thomas rasped, "but I had to do something before death took me. She's good kind. You'll see. And she needs someone who ain't cruel." He coughed violently, his breath turning ragged. Eli knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. "Don't waste your breath. I'll take care of her." Thomas gave a faint smile. "I knew you would. Hollow Creek may be empty, but it's got a heart still beating." Then, with one last exhale, Thomas Avery died, the storm wind outside rising like the world itself mourning him. The next morning, Eli buried him on the hill facing sunrise, the only place on his land that still held beauty. For a long time, he stood there, hat in hand, the new paper heavy in his pocket. He'd seen enough death in his life, but being given a wife by a dying man was something beyond any war he'd fought. Still, he couldn't ignore a man's last wish. He saddled his horse, dusty, and rode south. The trail was rough, nothing but dirt and silence, broken by the distant cry of a hawk. Hours passed before he reached a small, broken-down cabin near a dry stream. A woman stood outside, her dress plain but clean, her auburn hair catching what little sunlight made it through the clouds. She held a rifle steady, aimed straight at him. "That's far enough," she said, voice firm. "Who are you?" "Name's Eli Cartwright," he said, raising his hand slowly. "Your pa sent me." Her expression hardened. "My pa's dead." Eli nodded. "I know. I buried him this morning." The rifle shook in her hands, but she didn't lower it. "Why'd you come here?" Eli reached into his coat and carefully pulled out the paper. "He left you in my care. Said he had a preacher sign this." He unfolded it and handed it over. Clara took it, her eyes scanning the words. Her breath caught when she saw her name beside Eli's. "You're telling me I'm married to you?" she whispered. Eli looked away, the sun hitting the scar on his jaw. "That's what the paper says. Wasn't my choice." For a long time, she said nothing. The wind rustled the trees, and somewhere a coyote cried. Finally, she lowered the rifle, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. "My pa always said he'd find a way to protect me," she murmured. "Guess this was it." Eli nodded. I ain't here to take nothing from you, Clara. You can stay here if you like, or come to Hollow Creek. Ain't much there, but safer than this. She studied him, the dust on his boots, the lines of loneliness carved into his face. Why'd you even bother? You could have burned the paper and walked away. Eli met her gaze for the first time. Because a man's last words matter. Something in his voice made her lower her guard completely. She turned toward the cabin door. If you mean what you say, then help me pack. I'll come with you. By sundown, the two of them were on the road to Hollow Creek, strangers bound by the will of a dying man. Clara rode behind him in silence, clutching her father's satchel. When they reached the ranch, she looked around at the endless stretch of land, the weathered fences, the empty corral. You really live out here all alone? Always have, Eli replied. Guess that changes now. That night, as they sat by the fire in the small kitchen, Clara spoke softly. My pa used to tell me about you. Said you were the only man who never sold his land when the drought came. The only one who didn't bow to the bank. Eli took a slow sip of coffee. Stubbornness ain't the same as courage. Maybe not, she said, smiling faintly. But it's something. They fell silent again, the flames crackling between them. Two souls, strangers still, but the air between them felt heavier. Not from fear, but from something neither could name yet. When Clara finally went to the spare room, Eli sat by the window, staring out at the stars scattered across the cold desert sky. He reached into his pocket, unfolding the marriage paper one last time. The ink faded, the edges torn. He whispered, almost himself, Guess I ain't a loner anymore, Thomas, but I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do with that. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain, something rare in Hollow Creek. And far off, hidden in the darkness, a pair of eyes watched the ranch, waiting for night to fall. Shadows over Hollow Creek. The first few days at Hollow Creek Ranch passed quietly. Clara kept to herself, cooking, cleaning, and tending to the small garden out back, while Eli spent sunrise to sunset in the fields, repairing fences and driving the cattle. They spoke little, strangers bound by a dead man's wish, living under the same roof but in different worlds. Still, the silence between them began to change. It wasn't cold anymore. It was cautious, curious. Each evening, when the sun dropped below the canyon and the world turned gold, they'd sit by the porch. Clara would hum soft songs her mother had taught her, and Eli, who hadn't heard a woman's voice in years, would find himself listening longer than he meant to. But peace in the West never lasts long. The first sign, it started one morning when Eli rode out to the north pasture. A gate had been cut clean open, not broken by wind or beast, but sliced through with a sharp blade. His cattle had scattered into the hills. He rode hard to gather them, his mind turning with questions. When he returned to the ranch, Clara was outside, hanging laundry. He dismounted quickly. Anyone come by while I was gone? She frowned. No one that I saw. Eli scanned the horizon. Someone's been on my land. That night, he didn't sleep much. He sat by the window again, rifle across his knees, the lantern turned low. Around midnight, the horses began to snort and stamp in the corral. He stepped outside quietly, boots sinking into the cold dirt, and saw a shadow slipping between the barns. Who's there? He called. No answer. Only the sound of running feet, then the echo of hooves vanishing into the dark. Eli fired a warning shot into the air, the sound rolling over the hills. When he reached the barn, he found a small knife stuck into the wooden door and carved into it a single word. Avery. The truth about Thomas. By dawn, Eli knew something wasn't right. He saddled his horse and rode into town, leaving Clara behind with his dog, Boone, to keep watch. At the sheriff's office, he found Sheriff Milton, an old friend from the war. You look like you've seen a ghost, Milton said as Eli stepped in. Maybe I have, Eli replied, tossing the knife on the desk. Someone's sneaking around my land. They left this. You ever hear of Thomas Avery? The sheriff sighed heavily. Wish I hadn't. Avery used to run with a gang years back. The Marlowe Riders. Stagecoach robbers, bounty dodgers, you name it. He turned straight for a while, settled with his wife, had that girl. But Milton looked up at Eli. A man like that always leaves enemies. Eli's jaw tightened. He said he was trying to protect his daughter. Maybe he was, the sheriff said. But if the riders found out he had something worth talking, they'd come for it. You better watch that girl. She's all that's left of whatever he was hiding. Eli left town with the weight of the truth pressing on him like lead. He wasn't just protecting a widow anymore. He was guarding the legacy of a man who'd crossed dangerous lines. The storm breaks. When he returned, the sky had gone dark, a storm rolling in from the west. Clara was on the porch, worry written across her face. "You were gone half the day," she said. "I was starting to think." He held up a hand. "Clara, your pa wasn't the man you thought he was." She froze. "What do you mean?" "He ran with outlaws once. Men who might come looking for what he left behind. You know anything about that?" Clara shook her head, voice trembling. "No. He told me he quit that life before I was born. He made me promise never to go near the old mine south of the ridge. Said it was cursed." Eli frowned. "Not cursed. Hidden." He grabbed his coat. "We're going there." The rain came down hard as they rode toward the old mine, lightning flashing over the canyon walls. When they reached it, Eli dismounted and lit a lantern. Inside, the mine was cold and silent until the light hit something buried under an old tarp. He pulled it back. A wooden chest. Inside, stacks of gold bars, some marked with the stamp of the Union Treasury. Clara gasped. "Oh God, what did he do?" Eli stared at the gold. "Your pa didn't just run with thieves. He stole from the army. No wonder they're coming." And as if summoned by the words, a gunshot echoed from outside. Eli blew out the lantern, grabbed Clara, and pressed her against the stone wall. Voices came from the mouth of the mine, rough, laughing, cruel. "There it is, boys," one of them shouted. "Avery's girl and her new husband. Ain't that sweet?" Eli recognized the name that followed, Colt Marlowe, leader of the riders. The dying man's ghosts had finally found their way home. The fight at Hollow Creek. Eli and Clara made it back to the ranch under heavy rain, pursued by the riders. They barricaded the house, loading every rifle and revolver they had. Clara's hands trembled as she passed him bullets. "They'll kill us." "Not if I can help it," he said calmly, checking the barrel of his Winchester. "Stay low. If they break the window, shoot to scare, not to kill. They'll come for the gold." "How will we stop them?" Eli gave a faint smile. "I've stopped worse." The first rider came through the barn. Eli fired once. The man fell into the mud. The others charged, yelling through the rain, bullets tearing through the night. Windows shattered, glass flying across the kitchen. Clara screamed as a bullet grazed her arm. Eli grabbed her, dragging her behind the stove. "You all right?" She nodded, holding back tears. "I can fight." He handed her the revolver. "Then fight." The standoff raged for what felt like hours, thunder roaring, firelight flashing through broken glass. Finally, the leader stepped forward, calling out, "Cartwright, hand over the girl and the gold, and I might let you live." Eli stepped out onto the porch, soaked to the bone, rifle in hand. "You'll have to ride through me first." Colt Marlowe grinned. "That could be arranged." He drew, but Eli was faster. One shot cracked through the rain. Marlowe stumbled, dropped his gun, and fell into the mud, his men scattering like ghosts into the dark. A new dawn. By sunrise, the storm had passed. The fields were quiet again, the air fresh with the smell of wet earth. Clara came out of the house, her arm bandaged, her eyes tired but alive. "They're gone," she said softly. Eli nodded. "Won't be coming back." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You could have left me, Eli. You could have taken the gold and gone." He shook his head. "I ain't that kind of man." A small smile tugged at her lips. "My pa was right about you then." Eli took a deep breath, staring at the rising sun. "Your pa made mistakes. But he did one thing right. He made sure someone looked after you." Clara stepped closer. "He didn't just make sure I was looked after, Eli. He gave me a reason to stay alive." Their eyes met, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Slowly, she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. For the first time in years, Eli Cartwright smiled. Epilogue. 1 year later. Hollow Creek ranch bloomed again. The fences stood strong, the barn rebuilt. Clara's laughter echoed across the fields, and Eli found peace in the small things. The sound of hooves in the morning, the smell of fresh bread, the warmth of someone waiting on the porch at dusk. Sometimes, when the wind blew across the hills, Eli would glance at the grave on the ridge, Thomas Avery's grave, and tip his hat. "You were right, Thomas," he'd murmur. "She'd change everything." Then he turned back toward the house, where Clara waited, not as a gift of a dying man anymore, but as the woman who'd given life back to the loner rancher of Hollow Creek.